There are a ton of ways you can build a scrap farm, but which one's the best for you? No matter how far along you are in the game, you will find a scrap farm that works for you in this video. You'll get to see 3 different scrap farm designs, and I will share detailed schematics for all of them, as well as lists of all the items you'll need to build each one. These will help you build along in your own Astroneer world. And keep in mind, there's a perfect scrap farm for each type of player, so listen closely and you'll find the best one for you. But you know what they say, let's talk more action. So let's get started with the first one. This one's called the Resin Scrap Farm, and as you can see, it uses soil and turns it into scrap. You can also use resin directly, so if you gathered a ton of resin, you could just place it on this platform and you would get scrap from resin directly. But while it's going in the background and you'll see exactly how it works, let's discuss the pros and cons of this. So here are the pros. It's easy to build, you can make it as little or as large as you want, it's very modular. So for example, here's a smaller one, the one behind me is medium sized, and then here is a larger one. So you can make it fit your own base and your own preferences. Also another pro, it uses a basic resource, soil or resin. Both of these are basic resources you can get even in the early game. And you can actually see it working behind me here, and it works automatically. We don't actually have to do anything except bring the soil or the resin. And that's where we get to the cons. It requires constant hard work, aka gathering soil or resin. You will eventually get bored of having to constantly resupply the farm. Been there, done that, so trust me, you will get bored of it. But it is a pretty nice way to automate at least part of gathering scrap, so I'll have to give it props for that. Now let's actually score it. So we've got 3 criteria. We've got speed, efficiency and autonomy. And these are all gonna be scored from 1 to 10, with 10 being the best and 1 being the worst. So first up, we've got speed. As you can see, it's going pretty fast. The only thing limiting its speed is how long the soil centrifuges take to create the resin. We actually have 3 of them right here, which is a lot, and we still didn't max out the capacity of the shredder, so I'll have to give it a 5 out of 10 for speed. Next up, it's efficiency. This is where we measure how much scrap you get from the specific resource you are using versus how valuable that specific resource is. So for this farm, each soil gives you 4 resin, and 4 resin gives you 1 scrap. So you get 1 scrap per soil or 1 scrap per 4 resin. Obviously that's not really that good, so I'll also give it a 5 for efficiency. Next up, we've got autonomy. This answers the question, can you just leave it be and it will do all the work for you? For this farm, you have to constantly resupply it with soil or resin, so it doesn't do extremely well in the autonomy department either. I will have to give it a 2 out of 10 for this. It's not all bad though, so next let's discuss which type of player this is perfect for. You will enjoy this farm if you're a player like Hank. Hi. You might know him from a previous video. He is a hard worker who likes to get his hands dirty. He is constantly mining for soil, which he brings to the scrap farm. He's not afraid of a little bit of hard work, and his style is a little bit more old school. So he uses the simplest scrap farm design out there. He doesn't like complicated stuff, and he's pretty much in the early game. Now Hank, tell me, do you have any tips for the people who want to build this farm?
Yeah, here's a schematic of how to do it. You can screenshot if you'd like. And then this is the list of items that you're gonna use for this scrap farm. But remember, you can build it as small or as large as you want.
Thank you, Hank. If you want to build this exact farm, that you can go back and screenshot the schematic, and you'll find the list of items in the description below. But as Hank said, you can build this in various ways, so you can have it smaller or larger depending on your base and where you're at in the game. The second farm we'll talk about is the aluminum scrap farm. This works by transforming laterite into scrap, and you'll see the whole process right behind me. Basically it works the same way as the previous scrap farm, but except of turning resin into small canisters and then shredding them, this turns aluminum into rail junction bundles and then shreds those. So let's see, what are the pros of this farm? The biggest one is that there's no work required to resupply the farm. It works on its own, and all it needs is power. So if you make sure you've got enough power for this, it will just work on its own, you don't have to worry about it. You can even be on a different planet and it will just make scrap for you, no extra work required. And it's minimal effort except for one thing, which we'll discuss in the cons. Speaking of, here are the cons. You will need more resources to set up this scrap farm. So you're gonna need more resources up front in order to build this. For example, you're gonna need train stations, auto extractors, so those are gonna take a little bit more resources. This is not for early game players, so you've got to be at least mid game in order to afford those kinds of resources. And I said you won't really need to do much except for one thing, and that's moving the auto extractors once the node runs out. So you're gonna have to move them to a different node once the first one is depleted. That's all you've got to do. Let me actually show you how this works. We've got 2 auto extractors on a laterite node right here, and auto arms feed it into a train station that's set to load stopped cars, and then this cart has got a storage sensor on it which activates anytime it's full or empty, which then sends it to the other train station, and then that sends it back, and so on and so forth, which basically allows us to get a constant supply of laterite without doing any work. Now it's time to rate this. For speed, I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. This works much faster, especially if you use multiple auto extractors. You can use only one if you want, but I went with 2 here, and it really shows in speed. However, you can use even more, and you can speed this up without spending a ton of extra resources for it. For example, you can find 2 different laterite nodes and have 2 auto extractors on each of those, and they would all feed into one single farm. So that's why it gets a 7 for speed. Now let's talk about efficiency. For this we are using 2 aluminum in order to craft 1 rail junction, and 1 rail junction gives us 2 scrap. That means we are getting 1 scrap out of each aluminum. And since we are getting aluminum so easy without any work, I'm gonna give this a 7 out of 10 for efficiency. Next up, we need to talk about autonomy. In this department, I've got to give it a 9 out of 10, and that's because it just runs on its own. Like you saw right there behind me, it gets the laterite without us doing any work, so I'm just sitting up here and we are constantly getting scrap. So yeah, much better in the autonomy department. But what type of player is this scrap farm best for? Meet Fuchsia. Hi! If you've watched previous videos on the channel, you might know her as well. She's a little bit more ingenious than Hank, and she always figures out new ways to do stuff the smart way, not the hard way. She's also mid-game, so she's past the early game stage, which means she can afford all the items needed for this. If you are more like Fuchsia, then this is the farm for you. But I do have one question. Fuchsia, how did you build this?
Well, if you want to build this farm, then here's the schematic for it. Trust me, it's easier to build this than it looks. And then here's the list of items that you're gonna use for this.
Don't forget, you can find that list of items in the description as well. However, I'm still wondering, Fuchsia, how did you learn to build this?
Well, I watched this video right here and it showed me exactly how to do it. I also had a ton of fun while watching it.
Wow, that's actually my video, thanks Fuchsia. Let's move over to number 3, the Astronium Scrap Farm. This is a big one. I'll show you how it works in detail in just a moment, but first let's discuss the pros and cons. So the pros: this is the most efficient scrap farm. It's also the fastest, and it can produce the most amount of scrap before you need to move the auto extractors to a different node. So you already know it's gonna do extremely well in autonomy. But we also have to talk about the cons. It is the most expensive to build, so you're gonna need a lot of pretty advanced resources for this one. This is mostly for late game players, so it's not as accessible as the other ones. And it takes a bit longer to build the farm in the beginning. So this is not a quick 5-minute build, it takes like half an hour to set it up, and you also have to craft everything beforehand. Now we get to my favorite part, the scoring. For speed, I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. It would be a 10, but it could still use a little bit more fine-tuning. Next, it's efficiency. By using this scrap farm, you get 3 scrap out of each Astronium. So it's pretty safe to say this gets a 10 out of 10 for efficiency. Next, autonomy, 10 out of 10. You really don't have to do anything after setting this up. Honestly, I set this up quite a while ago, and it has produced a ton of scrap for me, which I've used for a number of videos. The only thing you have to do is move the auto extractors to a different Astronium node once the first one is done, and that happens very rarely. But let me also give you a quick rundown of how this works. Similar to the aluminum farm, we've got a cart that constantly supplies us with Astronium. It works the same way, but this farm actually has 6 auto extractors down next to the core, which all get us Astronium. This all allows for more speed while getting scrap. Then, using automated trade platforms, we are turning that Astronium into solid fuel jump jets, which we are then shredding for scrap. So you've seen how it works, but what kind of player is this best for? This is perfect for a player like Joe. Hey guys! As I said, this is the most efficient farm, so if you're late game and all you care about is efficiency and speed, and you've got the resources to spare in order to build this, then this is the farm for you. But I really need to know something. Joe, how did you build this?
Take a look at this schematic, that's what it looks like from above. And then over here, this is the list of items that I use to build this scrap farm.
That's really nice, Joe, but how did you learn to build this?
Well, I learned it from my favorite YouTuber, he did a really cool video about it.
Thanks, Joe. If you want to build this farm along with me, then check out this video. Or if you're not that far along in the game yet, then check out this other video about the aluminum scrap farm. That's gonna be it for this video. Now click on one of these and I'll see you there. Cheers, Astroneers!